Hi there, welcome to Fantasy Hub. I'm Mia, your storyteller. Today's story is filled with heartache, discovery, and a twist you won't see coming. So let's begin.
It started on a Tuesday morning in September. I remember because the autumn light was streaming through the clinic windows, casting these golden patterns across the massage table where she would soon lie. I was adjusting the oil warmers, humming, absently to myself when my receptionist buzzed through the intercom. "Lana, your 10 a.m. is here. Georgia Matthews." Georgia Matthews. Even if you didn't follow swimming, you knew that name. Olympic hopeful, national record holder, the kind of athlete whose body was a finely tuned machine worth millions in endorsement deals. And there I was, just another sports massage therapist in a mid-tier clinic, about to put my hands on greatness. When she walked into my treatment room, I nearly forgot how to breathe. The photos in magazines didn't do her justice. Georgia had this presence confident, almost predatory in the way she moved. Her shoulders were broad from years of cutting. Through water, her skin kissed by countless hours under pool lights and sun. But it was her eyes that caught me off guard. Dark and tense, with this mischievous glint that suggested she knew secrets about the world that the rest of us were still figuring out. "So you're the miracle worker everyone's been talking about?" she said, her voice carrying just a hint of an accent I couldn't quite place. She set her gym bag down and began peeling off her warm-up jacket with casual confidence. I cleared my throat, falling back on my professional training. "I specialize in sports therapy, particularly for swimmers. Your coach mentioned you've been having some tension in your shoulders and lower back." "Among other places," she replied, and I swear there was something loaded in the way she said it. I gestured toward the changing area. "Take your time getting comfortable. I'll step out while you get situated on the table." When I returned, she was lying face down, the sheet draped strategically across her lower body, her back exposed and gleaming under the soft lighting. I'd worked on hundreds of athletes before, but something about Georgia made my hands shake slightly as I warmed the oil between my palms. "Ready?" I asked, positioning myself at the head of the table. "Always," she murmured into the headrest. The moment my hands made contact with her shoulders, I felt it. This electric current that seemed to run between us like touching a live wire. Her muscles were tight, wound with the kind of tension that spoke of months of training, of pushing her body beyond normal limits. But underneath that, there was something else. A responsiveness that made her skin seem to sing under my touch. I worked methodically, professionally, focusing on the knots of tension clustered around her shoulder blades. My technique was practiced, clinical, or at least it was supposed to be. But as my hands moved across the landscape of her back, something shifted. Her breathing changed, became deeper, more intentional. Little sounds escaped her throat, not quite moans, but close enough to make heat pool in my stomach. "You're very good at this," she said, her voice slightly muffled by the headdress, but carrying clearly in the quiet room. "Thank you. I can feel where you're holding the most tension. Right here." I pressed deeper into a particularly stubborn knot near her spine, and she arched slightly, a soft gasp escaping her lips. We both froze. In 7 years of practice, I'd never had a client respond quite like that. The sound hung in the air between us, loaded with implications that neither of us was ready to acknowledge. I could feel my cheeks burning, my heart hammering against my ribs. "You should relax," I managed, my voice strained with the effort of maintaining professionalism. She turned her head slightly, and I caught a glimpse of her profile. The corner of her mouth curved in what might have been a smirk. "Make me," 2 words. That's all it took to turn my world upside down. The challenge in her voice, the way she looked at me like she could see right through my careful professional facade, it was intoxicating and terrifying all at once. I felt my grip tighten on her shoulders for just a second, felt her body respond to the pressure, and I knew I was in trouble. Deep, career-threatening, life-altering trouble. By our third session the following week, I had memorized every inch of Georgia's back. The small scar near her left shoulder blade from a childhood fall. The way her muscles bunched and released. Under my hands. The particular sound she made when I found just the right pressure point. I told myself it was professional interest, the kind of detailed attention any good therapist would pay to a client's body. But I was lying to myself, and we both knew it. Georgia had started scheduling extra appointments. Twice a week became 3 times, then 4. She always had reasons: a particularly intense training session, a knot that wouldn't quite release, preventive care before a competition. Her coach approved enthusiastically, praising the improvement in her performance. "Whatever you're doing to her," he told me after one session, "keep it up. She's swimming like a woman possessed." If only he knew. The tension between us grew with each appointment. Little things that could have been accidents but felt too intentional to dismiss. Georgia letting her towel slip lower than necessary when she got on the table. My hands somehow finding excuses to linger near the curve of her hips, the hollow at her lower back. The way she arched into my touch, like a cat stretching in sunlight. We never talked about it directly. How could we? I was a professional with a reputation to maintain, and she was a client with Olympic dreams. But the air in that room crackled with unspoken desire every time we were alone together. It was during our 6th session that things almost went too far. Georgia was face up this time, working on some tightness in her chest and shoulders from a particularly brutal training session. I was standing beside the table, my hands working the muscles along her collarbone, trying to ignore the way the sheet draped across her body, the way her breathing had become shallow and quick. "Lower," she whispered, her eyes closed, face relaxed. "I'm sorry. The tension, it's lower." Her hand moved to guide mine, pressing my palm against her sternum, dangerously close to the edge of the sheet. "Right here." My hand was warm against her skin, her heartbeat rapid under my palm. I could feel her pulse, could see the way her lips parted slightly as she breathed. We were inches apart, and I could smell her shampoo, something clean and citrusy. That made my head spin. "Lana," she whispered, and my name on her lips sounded like a prayer, like a plea. I don't know what would have happened next. Maybe I would have kissed her. Maybe I would have pulled away. But at that moment, my phone buzzed with a text from my next client, jarring me back to reality. I stepped back so quickly I nearly knocked. "Over the oil warmer?" "I think that's probably enough for today," I said, my voice shaky. George's eyes opened, and she looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Disappointment? Amusement? "Of course," she said smoothly, sitting up and pulling the sheet around herself. "Same time Thursday?" "Yes," I managed. "Thursday." But as she gathered her things and headed toward the changing area, she paused at the door and looked back at me over her shoulder. "You know, Lena," she said, her voice casual but her eyes intense, "I've been thinking, maybe we should schedule some evening appointments. When the clinic's quieter, more ... private." And then she was gone, leaving me standing there with trembling hands and a racing heart, knowing that I was about to cross a line I'd sworn I'd never cross. The clinic felt different at night. Without the bustle of daytime activity, the soft lighting and quiet music created an atmosphere that was more intimate than clinical. I'd agreed to George's request for an evening appointment, telling myself it was purely professional. She had a competition coming up and needed the extra attention. I was lying to myself again. It was nearly 8 p.m. when she arrived, her hair still damp from pool training, wearing a loose tracksuit that somehow made her look more devastating than any designer dress could have. The rest of the staff had gone home hours ago, leaving us completely alone in the building. "Thank you for staying late," she said as she entered my treatment room. "I know this is above and beyond." "It's fine," I replied, though my voice came out breathier than I'd intended. "How was training?" "Brutal. Coach had us doing sprint sets until I thought my lungs would explode." She stretched her arms above her head, and I caught a glimpse of toned stomach as her shirt rode up. "I definitely need your magic hands tonight." "My magic hands?" The phrase made something clench low in my stomach. She moved toward the changing area, then paused. "You know what? I'm too tired to bother with the sheet tonight. You don't mind, do you? We're both professionals here." Before I could respond, she was pulling off her tracksuit with the casual confidence of someone who'd spent her life in locker rooms and changing areas. But this wasn't a locker room, and I wasn't another athlete. This was my treatment room, and I was a woman who'd been fighting an increasingly losing battle against her attraction to this particular client. Georgia stretched out on the table completely nude, her body a work of art in the soft lighting. Every muscle was defined, but not bulky, her skin smooth and golden. She looked like a sculpture come to life, and I stood there like an idiot, my hands full of warm oil, trying to remember how to breathe. "Where would you like me to start tonight?" I asked, proud of how steady my voice sounded. "Wherever you think I need it most," she replied, turning her head to look at me. "You know my body better than anyone these days." And it was true. I did know her body. I knew that she held stress in her left shoulder more than her right. I knew that the muscles along her spine responded best to deep, slow pressure. I knew that when I worked the tension from her lower back, she made these small sounds that went straight to my core and made it hard to maintain professional distance. I started with her shoulders, working the familiar knots and tightness with practice skill, but tonight felt different. Without the barrier of the sheet, with the clinic empty around us, every touch felt more intimate, more charged with possibility. "You missed a spot," Georgia murmured when I'd been working for nearly 20 minutes. "Where?" Instead of telling me, she reached back and guided my hand lower, pressing my palm against the curve of her hip. "Here, I've been feeling tight here all week." My hand was warm against her skin, and I could feel her pulse under my fingertips. This wasn't a typical treatment area, and we both knew it. This was crossing lines, entering territory that had nothing to do with sports therapy and everything to do with the attraction that had been building between us for weeks. "Georgia," I whispered, and I wasn't sure if it was a warning or a plea. She turned over then, without warning, without the sheet, and suddenly we were face to face with nothing between us but air and possibility. Her eyes were dark in the dim light, her lips slightly parted, and I could see her chest rising and falling with quick, shallow breaths. "I know this is crazy," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know this could ruin everything for both of us, but I can't stop thinking about you, Lana, about this." She gestured between us. "About how it feels when you touch me." I should have stepped back. I should have handed her the sheet and told her to get dressed. Should have insisted we maintain professional boundaries. Instead, I found myself leaning closer, my hands braced on either side of the table, drawn to her like a moth to flame. "Georgia, if we do this, then we do it," she interrupted, reaching up to cup my face in her hands. "Stop overthinking everything. For once in your life, just feel." And then she was kissing me, and all my carefully constructed professional walls came crashing down. Her lips were soft and warm, tasting faintly of chlorine and something uniquely her. The kiss was gentle at first, questioning, giving me a chance to pull away. But when I didn't, when I actually leaned into her touch, she deepened it with a hunger that matched my own. My hands found her waist, her skin warm and smooth under my palms. She pulled me closer, her fingers tangling in my hair. and I could feel the heat of her body through my thin scrubs. Every rational thought I'd ever had flew out the window. There was only Georgia, only the taste of her mouth, and the feel of her hands on my skin, and the way she whispered my name like a prayer. That's when we heard the door. The sound of the front entrance opening, footsteps in the hallway cut through. Our passion like a knife. We broke apart instantly, Georgia grabbing for the sheet while I stumbled backward, my heart hammering so loudly I was sure whoever was coming could hear it. Carter? The voice echoed through the clinic. Dr. Patricia Wells, the head physiotherapist and my boss. I saw the lights on. Is everything all right? I looked at Georgia, who was now modestly covered, but whose lips were swollen from our kiss, whose hair was mussed from my hands. There was no hiding what had almost happened here. Come in, Dr. Wells, I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. I looked at Georgia, panic coursing through me. Get dressed, quickly. But when Dr. Wells appeared in the doorway 30 seconds later, arms crossed and wearing an expression that could freeze fire, it was clear she'd figured out exactly what kind of treatment had been taking place. We don't service clients like that, Carter, she said dryly, her eyes taking in Georgia's hastily donned tracksuit and my disheveled appearance. Perhaps Ms. Matthews would be more comfortable with one of our male therapists going forward. I opened my mouth to explain, to defend myself, but Georgia beat me to it. Actually, she said, that wicked grin spreading across her face like she was enjoying every second of this, I was just about to leave. Excellent session, Lana. Very thorough. I'll definitely be leaving a review. And she did. The next morning, there it was on our Yelp page. 5 stars. Very thorough. Would definitely recommend to anyone looking for personal attention. I wanted to die. Dr. Wells called me into her office first thing the next morning. I barely slept, replaying the events of the previous evening over and over in my mind. The kiss, the way Georgia felt in my arms, the look on my boss's face when she'd walked in on us. I knew my career was over before I even sat down in the chair across from her desk. 37 years, Dr. Wells said without preamble, not even bothering to look up from the paperwork she was reviewing. That's how long this clinic has been operating. 37 years of impeccable reputation, of professional excellence, of being the go-to facility for elite athletes in the city. I sat silently, my hands folded in my lap, waiting for the axe to fall. And in all that time, she continued, finally raising her eyes to meet mine, I have never had to deal with a situation like this. A therapist crossing boundaries with a client? Do you understand the liability issues alone? The potential for lawsuits, for professional sanctions. I know, I interrupted quietly. I know I messed up. I know there's no excuse for what happened, and I'm prepared to accept whatever consequences. Oh, you're prepared, she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. How generous of you. Tell me, Carter, what exactly were you thinking? That Olympic. Hopeful Georgia Matthews was going to throw away her career for a fling with her massage therapist. That this was some kind of romantic movie where love conquers all. The words hit like physical blows, each one designed to make me feel smaller, more foolish. And the worst part was, she wasn't wrong. I had been thinking exactly that, caught up in the fantasy that what Georgia and I had was special, worth the risk. You're suspended, Dr. Wells continued. Effective immediately. 2 weeks unpaid while we conduct a full review of your conduct. And if I were you, I'd use that time to seriously consider whether this profession is right for you. I nodded, not trusting my voice to remain steady. I'd known this was coming, but hearing it made it real in a way that felt like a punch to the gut. There's one more thing, she added as I stood to leave. Ms. Matthews called this morning. She's requested a new therapist. Specifically, she asked that you have no further contact with her whatsoever. That hurt more than the suspension, more than the threat to my career. Georgia wanted nothing to do with me. Whatever I thought was happening between us, whatever connection I'd felt, had been one-sided. She'd gotten what she wanted, a thrill, a conquest, and now she was moving on. I cleaned out my office in silence, packing my personal items into a cardboard box while my colleagues pretended not to stare. The plant Georgia had bought me after our second session, claiming the room needed more life. The small sculpture of a swimmer she'd given me for my birthday, saying it reminded her of the fluidity of my technique. Reminders of what I thought was something real, now just painful mementos of my professional downfall. The next few days blurred together in a haze of self-pity and regret. I spent hours analyzing every interaction Georgia and I had shared, looking for signs I'd misread, signals I'd misunderstood. Had she been playing with me from the beginning? Was I just entertainment, a distraction from the pressure of her training? I threw myself into researching new career options, updating my resume, anything to keep my mind occupied. But I couldn't escape the feeling that I'd lost more than just a job. I'd lost something I hadn't even realized I was looking for until it was gone. It was exactly 1 week into my suspension when everything changed again. I wasn't supposed to be there. I told myself I wouldn't watch, wouldn't put myself through the torture of seeing Georgia compete, seeing her succeed without me. But when the day of the regional championships arrived, I found myself parked outside the aquatic center, hands gripping the steering wheel, arguing with myself about whether to go in. She'd been training for this competition for months. It was her chance to qualify for nationals, to keep her Olympic dreams alive. Whatever had happened between us, whatever mistakes I'd made, she deserved to achieve her goals. I bought a ticket and found a seat in the upper section, far from the coaching area where I might be spotted. The pool deck buzzed with activity swimmers. Warming up, coaches shouting instructions, officials checking equipment. It was a world I'd been part of through my work with athletes, but now I felt like an outsider looking in. When Georgia appeared for her first event, the 200-meter freestyle, my breath caught in my throat. She looked focused, determined, but there was something different about her posture, something tense in the way she moved. During warm-ups, I noticed her rolling her shoulders repeatedly, the gesture I'd seen countless times on my treatment table when she was holding stress. She scanned the crowd as she approached the starting blocks, and for a moment, I wondered if she was looking for someone specific. Her eyes swept over the section where I was sitting, but I was too far away for her to spot me. The race began, and I watched her dive cleanly into the water, her form perfect as always. But something was off. Her stroke rhythm seemed forced, lacking the fluid grace that made her so devastating in the water. She was fighting the water instead of moving with it, and with each length, she fell further behind her usual pace. She touched the wall in fourth place, a full second slower than her personal best. I watched from my distant seat as she pulled herself out of the pool, her face a mask of frustration and disappointment. Her coach was there immediately, talking animatedly, but Georgia barely seemed to hear him. 3 more events, 3 more disappointing performances. By the end of the session, it was clear that Georgia Matthews, Olympic hopeful and national record holder, was having the worst competition of her career. I left before the session ended, unable to watch her struggle anymore. As I walked to my car, I tried to tell myself that her performance had nothing to do with me, that athletes have bad days all the time. But I couldn't shake the feeling that somehow our interrupted relationship had affected her preparation, her focus. That night, I did something I'd sworn I wouldn't do. I called her. The phone rang 4 times before she answered, her voice flat and emotionless. "What do you want, Lana?" "I wanted to see how you were doing. I heard about the competition, and You were there? The emotion cut back into her voice then, a mixture of surprise and something else I couldn't identify. In the stands. I know I shouldn't have been, but I wanted to support you even from a distance. There was a long silence, and I wondered if she'd hung up. Then she spoke, her voice softer than before. I kept looking for you. On the pool deck, in the coaching area. I know it was stupid, but I kept thinking maybe you'd come to watch. And when you weren't there, she trailed off. Georgia, I'm so sorry. About everything. About crossing professional lines, about putting you in an impossible position, about... Stop, she interrupted. Just stop. You're not the only one who made choices, Lana. I was there too. I wanted it too. But your career, my career, is fine. Or it will be once I figure out how to get my head back in the game. She paused. Can we meet? I need to talk to you, and not over the phone. I knew I should say no. I was still suspended, still under review. Meeting with her could only make things worse for both of us. But I missed her voice, missed the easy banter we'd share during our sessions, missed the way she made me feel like I was more than just another healthcare professional. Where? I asked. We met at a small coffee shop across town, the kind of place where nobody would recognize either of us. Georgia was already there when I arrived, sitting in a corner booth, with her back to the wall, wearing dark sunglasses despite being indoors. She looked tired, older somehow than she had just weeks before. Thank you for coming, she said as I slid into the seat across from her. Of course. I studied her face, taking in the tension around her eyes, the way she was holding her shoulders. How are you holding up? She laughed, but there was no humor in it. Honestly, I'm a mess. I haven't been able to focus on anything since that night at the clinic. All I can think about is you and how we left things and how stupid I was to think I could just pretend nothing happened. Georgia, let me finish, she said, holding up a hand. I need to say this before I lose my nerve. That night, when Dr. Wells walked in on us, you looked terrified. Like your whole world was falling apart. And all I could think was that I'd done that to you. I'd put you in that position, made you risk everything, and for what? A few stolen moments that could have destroyed both our careers? She pulled off her sunglasses, and I could see the dark circles under her eyes, the vulnerability she usually kept hidden behind her confident facade. So I panicked, she continued. I requested a new therapist, told them I didn't want to see you anymore. I thought if I could just cut things off cleanly, we could both move on and pretend it never happened. But I can't pretend, Lana. I can't stop thinking about you. My heart was racing, a mixture of hope and fear coursing through my veins. What are you saying? I'm saying I'm in love with you, she said simply. I'm saying that, whatever this thing is between us, it's not going away just because we ignore it. And I'm saying that I don't care about the consequences anymore. The words hung in the air between us, loaded with possibility and danger in equal measure. I thought about my suspension, about the career I might never get back, about all the reasons this was impossible. I'm in love with you too, I said, and the admission felt like jumping off a cliff. Her smile was radiant, transforming her entire face. So what do we do now? I don't know, I admitted. My career is probably over. I'm suspended pending a full review, and even if they don't fire me outright, no reputable clinic is going to hire someone with my history. And you have nationals coming up, the Olympics to think about. The media attention alone could be devastating for your sponsorships, your image. Let me worry about my career, she said firmly. The question is, are you willing to take the risk? Are you willing to see where this goes, even if it means burning some bridges? I looked at her across the small table, this incredible woman who could have anyone she wanted, who was willing. to risk everything for something real with me. The smart, practical part of my brain was screaming warnings, listing all the ways this could go wrong. But for once in my life, I listened to my heart instead. Yes, I said. Yes, I'm willing. She reached across the table and took my hand, her fingers warm and steady against mine. Good, she said, because I have a plan. Georgia's plan was audacious, risky, and completely insane. It was also perfectly her. I'm going to quit, she announced as casually as if she were discussing the weather. We were back at her apartment, a sleek modern space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. She'd been pacing back and forth across the living room for 20 minutes, her energy barely contained, while I sat on her couch trying to process what she'd just said. You're going to what? Quit swimming the whole professional circuit. She stopped pacing and turned to face me, her eyes bright with determination. I'm going to walk away from all of it. Georgia, no. You can't be serious. The Olympics will happen with or without me, she said, settling onto the couch beside me. Look, I've been thinking about this for weeks, even before everything happened with us. I'm 26 years old, Lana. I've been swimming competitively for 20 years. I've won championships, broken records, made more money than I could spend. In 3 lifetimes, but I'm tired. She took my hands in hers, her expression earnest. I'm tired of my life being scheduled down to the minute. I'm tired of every meal being calculated, every social interaction being managed by my agent, every relationship being evaluated for its impact on my brand. I want to live like a normal person. I want to fall in love without it being a PR crisis. But everything you've worked for will still be there in the record books, she said. My achievements don't disappear because I decide to retire. And honestly, after last week's competition, I'm not sure I still have the drive to compete. At the elite level, something's changed in me, and I don't think I can go back to who I was before I met you. I stared at her, this woman who was willing to give up everything she'd worked for me. It was romantic and terrifying and completely overwhelming. What would you do? I asked. If you quit swimming, what comes next? Her smile was mischievous, the expression I'd fallen in love with during our early sessions. Well, I was thinking maybe I could open a sports therapy clinic. I know this amazing massage therapist who might be looking for a business partner. My heart stopped. Georgia, I can't ask you to. You're not asking. I'm offering. I've got the capital. You've got the expertise. We could build something together, something that's ours. No professional review boards, no ethical violations, just us helping people and building a life together. It was a beautiful dream, but reality was more complicated. What about your endorsement deals? Your sponsors? You'd be walking away from millions of dollars. Money I don't need, she said simply. I've been smart with my investments. Lana, I could live comfortably for the rest of my life without ever earning another dollar. The question is, can you handle being with someone who's going to be in the public eye for a while? Because when I announce my retirement and my relationship with you, it's going to be a media circus. I thought about that, about cameras and reporters and having our relationship dissected by strangers. It sounded terrifying, but not as terrifying as the thought of losing Georgia again. There's something else, she continued, her voice more serious now. I want to go public with us. Not sneak around, not hide what we have. I want the whole world to know that Georgia Matthews is head over heels in love with Lana Carter. The whole world? Well, maybe we start smaller. Like with my next competition. I looked at her blankly. I thought you were quitting. I am. But I have one more meet scheduled, nationals next month. I want to swim one last time, and I want you there. Not hiding in the stands, but on the pool deck with me, as my girlfriend. The words sent a thrill through me that I tried to suppress. Georgia, the media attention will be intense, she agreed. But it'll also be honest. For the first time in my career, I'll be competing as my authentic self, with the person I love supporting me. Win or lose, it'll be worth it. I was quiet for a long moment, weighing the implications of what she was suggesting. It would mean the end of any chance I had of returning to my old career, but it might also mean the beginning of something better, something real. Okay, I said finally. Let's do it. Her smile could have powered the entire city. Really? Really, but on one condition. Anything. Before we go public, before we turn our lives upside down, I want some time. Just us figuring out what this is when we're not sneaking around or worried about getting caught. Can we have that? Can we have that? She leaned over and kissed me then, soft and sweet and full of promise. We can have whatever you want, she murmured against my lips. We have all the time in the world. The national championships were being held in a massive aquatic complex in Los Angeles, the kind of venue that screamed prestige and importance. As we walked through the athlete entrance, Georgia's hand firm in mine, I felt the weight of hundreds of eyes on us. Cameras flashed, capturing what would soon be front-page news across the sports world. Georgia had called a press conference for that morning before her first event. She'd kept the details vague, saying only that she had an important announcement to make. The media room was packed, reporters sensing a story, photographers positioning themselves for the perfect shot. I stood at the back of the room, my heart hammering as Georgia took the podium. She looked every inch the champion in her. Team tracksuit, confident and poised, but I could see the slight tremor in her hands as she adjusted the microphone. Thank you all for coming, she began, her voice carrying clearly through the room. I know there's been speculation about my performance lately, about my focus and my commitment to the sport. Today, I want to set the record straight. She paused, her eyes finding mine across the crowded room, and I saw her take a deep breath. Swimming has been my life for 20 years. It's given me everything: success, financial security, a platform to inspire others. But it's also demanded everything in return. My time, my energy, my privacy, my relationships. For most of my career, I've been willing to make those sacrifices because I believed that winning was worth any price. Another pause, and I could feel the tension in the room ratchet up a notch. But over the past few months, I've realized that there are some things more important than winning. Love, for instance, authenticity, the courage to live your truth, even when it's inconvenient or complicated or potentially career-ending. A murmur went through the crowd, cameras clicking more rapidly now. Which brings me to why I called you. All here today. I want to introduce you to someone who has changed my life in ways I never thought possible. Someone who has shown me what it means to be loved for who I am, not what I've accomplished. She gestured toward the back of the room, and suddenly every camera was turning in my direction. Lana Carter, would you please join me up here? My legs felt like jelly as I made my way through the crowd of reporters, their voices rising with questions and speculation. When I reached the podium, Georgia's arm came around my waist, anchoring me to her side. This is Lana, Georgia said, her voice warm with affection. She's a sports massage therapist. She's brilliant at what she does, and she's the woman I'm in love with. The room erupted. Cameras flashed like lightning, reporters shouted questions, and I felt Georgia's grip on me tighten protectively. I know this raises questions about professional boundaries, Georgia continued, raising her voice to be heard over the chaos. I know some of you will want to make this into a scandal, but what Lana and I have is real, it's honest, and it's worth more to me than any medal or record. She turned to look at me then, and in front of all those cameras and reporters, she kissed me. It was soft, sweet, and utterly unashamed, and when we broke apart, her smile was radiant. "I'll be swimming my final competition today," she announced, causing another wave of shocked murmurs. "After nationals, I'll be retiring from professional swimming to focus on building a life with the woman I love." The questions came fast and furious after that, but Georgia handled them with the same grace she'd always shown in interviews. Yes, she was serious about retirement. No, she wasn't being forced out by sponsors or governing bodies. Yes, she was prepared for the media attention that would follow this announcement. "Any regrets?" one reporter called out. Georgia's arm tightened around me, and she looked directly into the camera. "Only that it took me this long to be brave enough to choose love over fear." 4 hours later, Georgia stood on the starting blocks for the 200-meter freestyle, her signature event and the race that would close out her career. I was on the pool deck in the coaching area, wearing the credentials she'd arranged for me, feeling simultaneously proud and terrified as cameras continued to track our every move. The morning's press conference had sent shockwaves through the sports world. My phone had been buzzing nonstop with calls from reporters, from former colleagues, from friends who'd seen the news and couldn't believe quiet. Professional Lana Carter was at the center of such a public spectacle. But all of that faded away as Georgia settled into her starting position. This was her moment, her final chance to compete at the highest level, and I could see the familiar transformation taking place. The playful, affectionate woman I'd fallen in love with disappeared, replaced by the focused, determined athlete who had dominated her sport for years. "Swimmers, take your mark." The pool fell silent, that moment Georgia had described where time seemed to stop and infinite possibilities stretched ahead. I held my breath, my hands clenched at my sides, and whispered a prayer to whatever gods protected swimmers and the people who loved them. The starting signal sounded, and 8 of the world's best swimmers exploded into the water. Georgia's dive was perfect, her entry clean and powerful, and she surfaced already in perfect stroke rhythm. This was different from her disastrous performance a month ago. This was the Georgia Matthews the world knew, moving through the water with liquid grace and deadly efficiency. 50 meters, and she was in third place, staying patient behind the early leaders. 100 meters, and she'd moved into second, her stroke rate increasing but still controlled. At the 150-meter wall, she was even with the leader, and I could see her shifting into the final gear that had won her so many races over the years. The last 50 meters of a race are where champions are made, and Georgia had always been at her best when everything was on the line. She pulled ahead with 30 meters to go, her stroke becoming more powerful with each length, her kick driving her toward the wall with unstoppable momentum. She touched first by nearly a full second, a decisive victory that brought the crowd to its feet. When she surfaced and saw the time on the scoreboard, a season best that proved she was leaving the sport at the top of her game, her face split into a smile that could have lit up the entire arena. She pulled herself out of the pool and looked directly at me, ignoring the reporters and photographers who were already swarming the deck. Without a word, she walked over to where I was standing and pulled me into a kiss that was captured by every camera in the building. "How's that for a retirement race?" she murmured against my lips, and I could taste the chlorine and victory on her breath. "Perfect," I whispered back. "Absolutely perfect."